So for the past few weeks, I've been using a refurbished Google Pixel 6 Pro for a couple reasons. Number one, Google has made leaps and bounds with their phone software support, including 7 years of software support for the recently announced Pixel 8 and 8 Pro. And this phone on its own is getting support until October of 2023 for feature support and September of 2025 for security updates. Just that software support on its own is better than any of the software support on Android that I have ever gotten. And the last time I got software support like that on any phone was with the iPhone 6s. And the third reason is because I've been trying to kind of separate my personal phone from what I do here on YouTube, because I want to make this into a career, but I would also like to have my own personal time without getting a bunch of emails on my personal phone. So what better way to try out an Android phone, testing out the software support, testing out the latest version of Android, and seeing how these phones have aged over the past few years while also getting a work phone. I think it's a pretty good deal. Maybe, because this is a refurbished phone, but it's still an older Google Pixel, so I want to see how some of the hardware that maybe wasn't touched from the refurbished process has aged. We got some good, we got some bad, we got some ugly, and we got a partner for the video. Yeah, I know that was probably about as cheesy as a Linus Tech Tips transition, but I do actually have a partner for this video, and it's Mint Mobile of all companies, which their timing for this was perfect because I had been looking to get a smartphone on my existing plan as a work phone for quite a while, but like most big carriers, it was going to be very expensive, and it almost killed the idea of this video and made me not want to pull the trigger on separating my personal phone from my work phone. And I know the justification they use for those prices is coverage, speed, 5G access, unlimited talk and text, and hotspots, but for $15 a month, Mint Mobile does all of that. Oh yeah, and speaking of 5G connectivity, even though this is just a work phone and that wasn't really a priority for me, Mint Mobile is built on the largest 5G network in the nation, and with all the traveling I did over the Thanksgiving holiday, I never actually saw anything other than 5G signal. That actually really impressed me. I was also really impressed by the fact that I didn't have to wait around for a SIM card to show up. I could just start the account and download an eSIM. And considering most modern phones support eSIMs, you can get started without even having to go to a store. It was fantastic. Oh, and if your phone doesn't support eSIM, Mint Mobile will ship you a physical SIM card for free. And if you're not looking to get a brand new phone number like I was, you can always move your existing phone number from your existing carrier over to Mint Mobile, and they make it super easy. Big wireless carriers put a ton of effort into trying to make you think that they're the only game in town. Even I almost fell for it when I was looking for this work phone, but they're not. And now through January 1st, if you sign up using the link in my description down below, trymintmobile.com/GarrettCrespo, you can get 3 additional months free when you sign up with a 3-month plan through Mint Mobile. And this includes everything all the way up to their unlimited plan. Again, that link is trymintmobile.com/GarrettCrespo right here on the screen, and it'll be in the link in the description. Huge thanks to Mint Mobile for partnering with me for this video. Now on to the rest of the video. So like I said a moment ago, one of the big reasons why I decided to go with a Google Pixel 6 Pro was because it was still supported by modern Android, that being Android 14. And this was actually one of my first experiences with Android 14 on a personal device of mine. The most recent version of Android I had used up to this point was Android 11, which was the last update that the Motorola Razr got, because that was my last modern Android smartphone experience that wasn't borrowing a phone from my friend. And like I will be doing a video talking about my experiences as an iPhone user using Android, but I will say for now, it is super nice to see that you can still be quite a tinkerer with Android, but if you're just an average user, it has a lot more polish than it used to on stock Android. And yes, I know Samsung put a lot of their own polish into Android with their versions of it with One UI and all that, but it is super nice to see stock Android with a pretty good attention to little details. So that's one of my reasons, and again, I'll be doing a video talking more about my experiences with Android as an iPhone user in a different video. One of my other reasons was because this was the first time that Google really seemed to be refining a design language, as opposed to just kind of throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks from generation to generation when it comes to design. This was the first time that Google really picked a design language that was unique and actually kind of stood out from the crowd, because before that we had stuff that kind of looked like an iPhone or had a notch like the iPhone or had some cues here and there from Samsung, but this was the first time we saw a design that really didn't look like anything else on the market. And I have to say, it's aged surprisingly well. I will point out that as it's aged, there have been a few things here and there that crop up over time. For example, the bezel is obviously going to show some wear and tear, and in this particular case, I can tell that it was in a case because the plastic 5G antenna at the top has quite a bit of extra wear around what I'm assuming is a microphone hole, which would have been where dirt came through if it had something like an OtterBox case on it. And I do think it's fair to assume that this one was probably living its life in an OtterBox case, because when I was browsing the web trying to find a good refurbished model of the Pixel 6 Pro, one of the things I saw a lot of was scratched up frames. These metal frames got scratched really badly if the phone wasn't in a pretty hefty case. And the only scratches that I have on this phone on the frame are down along the bottom, which lines up with my OtterBox theory because it's right near the speakers, where the cutout for the speakers would be from an OtterBox case. So cosmetically, I do feel like I lucked out on this phone because, again, I saw a lot of scratched ones on the refurbished market, even though they were refurbished, because when you scratch a metal frame, you can only do so much to bring that back. So in that regard, if you are looking to get a refurbished Google Pixel 6 or 6 Pro, it's best to try to find one that looks like it's lived most of its life in a case, because between the glass back, the metal framing around the visor at the top, the glass on the visor, the metal frame itself, and of course the screen, if it didn't have a case that it lived in for most of its life, those parts are probably going to show some significant wear and tear, especially up by the camera bump. This was where I saw a ton of scratches. Then again, if you are just buying this to put in a case, I guess the only surface you'd have to worry about having scratches on would be the screen. Speaking of which, this screen is fantastic for its age. One of the big concerns that I always have when it comes to buying any device that has an OLED screen is burn-in. And with this screen being one of the brighter ones that Google made at the time, and with it being a 120 Hz screen, I was very worried that there was going to be burn-in. But even putting a 50% or 40% gray on the screen, there's nothing. It's fantastic. It runs perfectly smooth. It still has a fully functional under-screen fingerprint reader, which I've seen some where if it's scratched up badly enough, it doesn't read it super well, but this one works perfectly fine, and it actually reminded me of how much I miss fingerprint readers on smartphones. Like, Apple, please bring it back. Overall, this screen is fantastic. There's no burn-in, the fingerprint reader still works, the always-on display is super nice if I can get it to show on camera. There we go. I love the 120 Hz refresh rate, and I've pretty much been spoiled by having that on almost everything now. And I will say the only complaint that I have with this display isn't even to do with the age, but it's a complaint that people had even when it was new, which is the curved edge. I know Google does what they can to kind of pick up on palm rejection, but I've still had certain instances where I'm scrolling and it picks up my palm as an input and just stops the scrolling motion. I know they're moving away from that, and rightly so. Samsung, I blame you for the curved displays, and I'm just super glad that every phone company is slowly moving away from it. Now, if only we can get them to give up on folding phones, or at least make them more durable, and I think as a phone enthusiast, I'd be happy. Now, I know I already mentioned that this device supports the latest version of Android, that being Android 14, but in an older video, I mentioned how the iPhone 4S got updated to death because Apple kept pushing the latest version of iOS to it until the hardware couldn't keep up with the software. And the point of that video was that long-term software support can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because you want to basically support these devices as long as possible, but you also don't want to make them unbearably slow. So how does Android perform on this phone, even though it originally shipped with Android 12? It runs fantastically. I've had no slowdowns on this phone. It's been keeping up with everything I've asked of it. I haven't done any really heavy gaming, so I'm sure I'll try that out when I do my later video about using Android, but for day-to-day tasks, checking emails, watching YouTube videos, doing all the things that I would normally do on my iPhone when I was really getting the hang of this phone, I had no issues. The screen ran at its full refresh rate the entire time. It didn't feel like it was at all the age that it actually is. And funnily enough, I will put this screenshot up here on screen, but I ran a Geekbench test, which goes against most of the stuff that I believe in because I think that synthetic benchmarks are stupid. But when I ran this benchmark, I got the highest score that was listed of the Tensor chip on Android 14. So I don't know if it's more optimized now with Android 14 or what the case is or how old those other benchmarks are, but yeah, I got the highest original Google Tensor chip score on Geekbench 6, which is kind of wild. I don't know why, but I'll take it. So yeah, the performance has been fantastic, and the Geekbench thing was kind of cool, but I do want to throw some more games at it just to see how it holds up on heavier games like Genshin Impact. And speaking of holding up, something that held up way better than I've seen from a lot of other Android phones and used devices in general was the battery. I know back when this phone came out, the battery was a bit of a sticking point for some people because it didn't seem to go quite through the whole day. In my case, I know my general use is a bit lighter than somebody who is full-time on Android, but even on the days where I was exclusively using this Android phone to sort of re-educate myself on what Android can do now, I was ending the day at about 30% most times. The only time I was able to kill this battery before dinner was when I was sick and just laying on the couch watching a bunch of YouTube videos. I was streaming them through Wi-Fi, I had them cranked up to the highest resolution, and I was just watching long-form podcast videos, bunch of different tech videos, basically just looping a bunch of videos constantly. And yeah, that was the one instance where I managed to kill this battery before dinner. And well, because it charges via USB-C or wireless charging, I could just throw it on a fast charger and keep on going. So the battery on this thing held up surprisingly well, and I was expecting to get what I normally get when I get used products with batteries, which is about 3/4 of what you would normally expect. But I was getting as good, if not better, results than what I was seeing from reviews when this phone was brand new. So I don't know if they replaced the battery in the refurbishing process, because even though Apple got crap for not showing the battery life of the device, Google doesn't, or at least I wasn't able to find it, but it's hard to say. But it seems like it's a brand new battery, so that's cool. Actually, just interjecting here because I just finished recording and I looked up the order that I made, and the listing says that they don't replace the battery, they just make sure that it is at 80% of its original capacity or higher. So again, I guess I lucked out both in terms of the cosmetic quality and the battery life, so that's cool. And this is just a little aside, I'll talk more about it in my later videos, but I love the wireless power sharing where I can just drop something on this and charge it up. I did that a couple times with my headphones, and it's so cool to me, and I really do wish the iPhone would have it. But yeah, with the battery life, colored me impressed. Either they replaced the battery or the battery held up extremely well. So far in this video, it has been all positives for this device. It looks fantastic because I feel like it's lived its entire life in a case. The battery life is great. It's still supported on the latest version of Android, and it runs that version of Android fantastically despite the fact that the processor is a bit older. So when I said there was good, there was bad, and there was ugly, I kind of lied. There's good, there's no bad, but there is something so ugly that even though I lucked out on all of those other things, this one ugly thing has made me go and hunt down another one to replace this as my work phone. And it is the most unfortunate and ironic problem because it has to do with the camera, the thing that everybody praises on the Google Pixel. So in this generation of the Google Pixel, this was the first time they bumped up the resolution for the main sensor. You also get a telephoto lens and you have an ultra-wide lens. And when I take pictures with the ultra-wide, it looks really good. And the zoom lens also looks really good. It's, I would say, about on par in video with the iPhone, and it's really good for photos. Same with the ultra-wide. Google is super good at post-processing. But something that they can't process out of images is a crack on the internal lens of the main camera. Because you've been looking at B-roll footage this entire time, and there's no crack on the exterior glass. It is actually a crack in the physical lens underneath of the glass cover of the phone. And I just can't use it. I literally can't use that main sensor. It is ruined. And what really sucks is that I had set the entire phone up before realizing that there was a crack in the main sensor. And I had actually taken it out to use it for Thanksgiving because I wanted to use the legendary photo quality of the Google Pixel to take pictures at Thanksgiving. And there's a line right in the middle of the sensor. And this is apparently a problem that's existed for a little while with Google Pixels. I did some research and a lot of them are around the corners. There are some that are pretty close to the center of the frame, but no, mine just goes straight across the center of the frame. And that really sucks. And of course, because I bought it refurbished, there's no warranty. My only recourse is to return the phone and purchase another one. And that kind of stings. Not that it's going to cost me anything extra, it's just going to be a one-for-one swap, but it just kind of bums me out because I was this close to finally having a work phone that was going to let me experience the latest versions of Android. I was going to be able to try out Google's legendary Pixel camera for myself, both with photo and video, try out all the fancy new features, and just generally get my feet wet with Google again. And this happened. Man, does that suck. Because I mean, like I said through this entire video, this thing has been one luck out after another. The battery's been great, the looks are great, there's no burn-in on the screen. It is just such a great phone, that is let down by one of the main things that I was going to use it for outside of work with YouTube here. Damn. I do have a point for bringing this up, aside from the fact that it just sucks that this was my experience with my first refurbished Google Pixel. But the point I want you to take away from this is that there were several used and refurbished smartphone vendors that I saw when I was doing my research that would not offer refunds if the phone was already set up or activated, or they just wouldn't return it, period. Avoid those at all costs, because if you can't return a device and you run into a situation like this where everything about it is great except for one thing that's like a game-breaking problem, you're screwed. So be very careful with that. And if you have the opportunity to actually message the vendor before purchasing the device, that might be a better option, because that will give you a chance to ask questions like, hey, how's the camera on this thing? And I actually did think at first that it was a problem with the movement in the camera, because you can hear it shaking, but that's actually the, I guess, telephoto lens with something, but that's not the point. So aside from the takeaway of, if you're gonna buy a refurbished phone, make sure you can return it, or maybe even see if you can get in touch with the seller, there are a couple things to keep in mind. Number one, Google software support for the Pixel lineup is really good. It's already been pretty good over the years, but the fact that this phone runs as good on Android 14 as it did when I first booted it up under Android 12 is nothing short of impressive. You don't even see that on some of the newer iPhones, and Google pulled it off, so kudos. Number two, the wear and tear on these devices doesn't really matter if you're going to be throwing a case on it, but it is definitely something worth keeping an eye on if you aren't going to be using a case on the phone like I do. Caseless life. That's just how I roll. Number three, if you can find a place that has a battery guarantee of 80% or more, the battery life, at least in my experience on the Pixel, will be pretty damn good. So definitely make sure you can find a place that either replaces the battery or gives you a guarantee of a certain percentage of life remaining on the phone. And lastly, and the one that stings the most for me personally, is that you can keep all of these things in mind and go and check on all of these little parameters to make sure that the phone meets your requirements, and still run into something that you didn't account for that has you returning the phone. In my case, it was the camera, and that really sucks. But when I get this device replaced and I have a functional camera with the rest of the phone hopefully in as good a condition, well, I'll be doing another video talking about my experience with Android as an iPhone user. But for now, that's it. Hopefully you all learned something with this video. I put a lot of time and effort into this, and like I said at the start, huge thanks to Mint Mobile for partnering with me for this video. That is super awesome and made this entire thing possible to begin with. Don't forget to check out that link down in the description, trymintmobile.com/Garrett Crespo. And aside from that, thank you all so much for watching this video. Hopefully you all enjoyed. If you did, make sure to give it a like. If you did like it and you want to see more like this video, go ahead and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any other videos like this in the future. And aside from that, I'll see you all in the next video. Make sure to be there and have a good one.